before we watch the interview, we are going to talk about these posts that just came out from Q, Runbeck, Dominion, Secretary of State offices, investigators, researchers, whistleblowers, patriots in trusted positions. Trust yourself. You've seen the truth. Time to show the world. Focus, ascension, Q. So, there's a lot to kind of unpack here with all of these posts. Just as far as the first few, tidbits, I'm still working on some of the latter parts of the post itself, because we get into this level of ambiguity where, you have to do some deep research in this. But as far as researching and understanding what Runbeck is, what the, as you can see here, the first three things mentioned here, Runbeck, Dominion, and the Secretary of State offices, this is a very, very important part of the post that we're going to break down quickly for you guys out there. If you guys don't know what Catherine Engelbrecht, the researchers, that would be us who are doing the actual researching and trying to get to the information that matters. Whistleblowers who are, going to be exposing this from inside. But then Q wants us to know there are patriots in trusted positions. Interesting. Wonder what that'll manifest into. And telling us to trust ourselves, saying we've seen the truth. It's time to show the world. Then it says focus, and ascension. Now, I'm having trouble with those last few posts kind of deciphering what it means. Is focus an acronym? Is it focus meaning we have to focus harder on some aspect that we're missing? Ascension is, can be interpreted several different ways if you're trying to really unpack that one. If you guys have any thoughts or clues or ideas or things you've seen or heard somewhere else, please share them in the comments below. I want to hear what you guys have to say about this. Help me kind of tie all the loose ends up on this post, and we'll circle back to it, as Jen Sakai would say, and we'll get back to it in a future episode, hopefully, to kind of unpack everything in here, because I think it's valuable and it's worth looking into. Now, one other thing I wanted to mention just briefly is that, I feel the same frustration you guys feel. You get these Q posts and you're like, if they know there's fraud, just do something about it. Like, don't tell us that there is and then just say, trust yourself. It's like, yeah, we trust ourselves. We know there's fraud and this is time to show the world. Well, yeah, show the world. Like, if the military is really running an operation, we need to start arresting people, right? We have to act on this. But the more I think about it, the more I put my, ego aside and my own kind of impetuous nature to want to just jump on top of things and fix them immediately, which is, just a characteristic that I think we all have a lot of times, it actually makes sense that this is going to be played out the way it's playing out. I mean, FTX money laundering, investigate Ticketmaster over Taylor Swift's tickets. It's like, this is the level of clown world in which we live. So, in case you were wondering, speaking of clown world, outfit of alleged crypto scammer donated $300,000 to House committee members, but the same ones who are about to launch an investigation into him. So I'm sure there's no conflict of interest there whatsoever. I'm sure it's all going to be on the up and up. And on top of that, The Intercept, that ridiculous rag that once maybe had some journalistic integrity, but lost most of it, just like The Atlantic and other organizations. Not that The Atlantic ever had any to begin with. The Intercept begging readers for donations after a multi-million-dollar Sam Bankman-Fried grant has been put on hold. Oh, the Ponzi schemer can't pay for it anymore. Oh, no. As Kevin, they're just directly connected by family members to those organizations, the people running them, and no investigation in Sam Bankman-Fried except the one run by Congress who took donations from him, so I'm sure that's on the up and up. I talked about, in brief, I talked about FTX and other things with the CEO of Noble Gold Investments. You guys know him as the sponsor of this show, but I wanted to bring him on to talk about Noble Gold and the company itself, but also about why gold is a good store of value, why you guys should be looking at it, and all that other stuff. So I'm going to play this interview between me and him, and I hope you guys enjoy it. Let's go ahead and watch the interview between me and Colin Plume of Noble Gold Investments right now, where we're going to cover some of the issues that we've talked about here in today's show. Watch this. High report that's coming out of, I found it over on Zero Hedge, and you can see it right here. I'm going to put it on the screen for us, but it essentially is this Goldman Sachs has come out with this report talking about gold, and they're talking about the Fed versus BRICS. You guys out there know BRICS is Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa, and it may be being joined by Saudi Arabia. Who knows what's happening with that? But the interesting thing I wanted to talk about here is that there is there's a report that's coming out from Goldman Sachs where they're talking about central banks buying up large amounts of gold. And the question I have when you read through this report is, what, in your opinion, are these central banks doing? Why are they seeing gold as such a place, such a strong place to store value as this the economic uncertainty continues to mount and build? What's your take on that, Colin? What can you tell our audience about your opinion on what the value of gold is in storing value in a time of trouble like we're seeing, economically speaking right now?
Well, central banks typically have to buy investments that they can either leverage against, or they're looking for a very safe, kind of secure return. With the Fed increasing interest rates, the dollar being incredibly strong right now, and even though bond rates are the highest they've been I think in 25 years, relative to what inflation is, they're still very modest. So the central banks, what they're looking to do is buying gold as a hedge against, all the things that are happening out there. And, a lot of central banks have other assets too that have not fared very well this year. Stock market has obviously not done very well for most investors. I think most people are down anywhere from 14 to 25% of their stock market portfolio. So they're looking at gold as an incredible opportunity, because gold and silver and platinum and palladium really haven't taken off. They've gone down like everything else, not as much as the stock market this year, but they've been hurt by this very strong dollar. Corporations have been hurt by this very strong dollar, because a lot of corporations here in the U.S. that sell goods overseas are really struggling with how that arbitrage is, because our goods are very expensive right now for trading them overseas. So everyone's looking for that safe, conservative return, and so that's why a lot of the central banks have decided to buy more gold and silver and put it in their coffers.
See, I find that fascinating, because when you look at the market overall, especially the gold market, let's just take that as one example, and silver to a lesser extent. But, you see the last year, a little bit of a dip, but if you look at the 5-year, you're gaining strength and you're building on that. But like you said, the strength of the dollar is actually a negative correlation to gold. Is that what you were kind of getting at there?
That's correct. And most investments right now, in terms of the BRIC nations, another thing that's been happening is that Russia and China have been obviously doing trading. And one of the things that's happened, and this has never happened before, it happened about 60 days ago, is that Russia released 2 bonds in the yuan. They released a bond that was backed by one of the largest mining companies in Russia, and also one of the biggest oil companies in Russia. And because obviously Russia's under sanctions, they couldn't release that onto a normal market. So they released those bonds in the yuan, and those bonds were between $5 and $10 billion, and they sold out like nearly immediately. So these countries, these BRIC nations, have been looking for ways to trade outside of the dollar. And if you look at the global landscape of most central banks, the amount of U.S. debt and U.S. dollars in the reserves have dropped very considerably over the last 10 years. And now more than ever, people are concerned about our country and our debt. So it's really pushing countries around the world to use other instruments to put into their central banks. Now, the nice thing about gold, as if a central bank buys it, it's an easy asset to borrow against. Even U.S. banks now, gold is a tier 1 investment asset for them. So a U.S. bank, all the big banks like Wells Fargo and Bank of America, they can have gold in reserves, and they can lend based on how much gold they have, because it's a tier 1 asset. So it's a good bartering asset for them. So when a country wants to trade oil or some big transaction, they want some good collateral. Gold is a very good option for them. And obviously, you can't just print gold out of thin air like they can, fiat money. So it gives them security, and that's why we're seeing a lot of buying of central banks this year.
See, that makes perfect sense. And, when I look at what the big banks are doing, the central banks essentially, I look at what they do, and especially the stuff they do that they don't really want us to pay attention to. That's when I'm like, well, maybe we should be doing that too, because we need to be getting ahead of whatever they see coming. Because if they see it coming, that means it's definitely going to be coming. And speaking of that, we talk about, financial contagion in the markets and all that stuff. But I mean, getting beyond that, how do you see like the takeoff inflation, right? How is gold going to help, your normal investor basically hedge against things like inflation and the raising interest rates and all of these things we're seeing coming as a tsunami against consumers and investors? What do you see that, gold offering the normal everyday consumer as opposed to other investments and other things?
Yeah, and I will say it does look like the sort of peak inflation that we've seen in some of the reports. It does seem like inflation is pulling back a bit. If you look at the core PPI report that just came out and some of the other reports for inflation, it does seem like we're slowing a little bit. So I wouldn't be surprised if the rate increase in December is lower. They were talking about doing 75 basis points, but I think it could be 50 basis points based on what some of the reports were saying, which would be good. So the thing about inflation, the Fed, a lot of people don't know their mandate is to keep inflation at 2%. And I, in my opinion, I don't think it's a fair mandate because I don't think we can keep inflation at 2%. Most of the world right now has double-digit inflation. I mean, we're talking about 40, 50 countries that have double-digit inflation. So I don't think we're going to get back to 2% anytime soon. I think we're probably going to normalize in the 4 or 5% range. I think that's going to be more of the norm. And actually, that would probably be more realistic to actually what the numbers are. But how gold plays into it is that, gold the use of gold has changed a lot over the last 20, 30 years, or going back, 50 years when we were on the gold standard until 1971. Gold was just currency. And now gold is used in a lot of industry that it wasn't used. It's used in cell phones. They use it in the heart monitors that they put into people now. Gold has a lot of uses in hospitals. A lot of the new technology that they're working on, gold is used. So it's a very desired metal for a lot of different industries. And so that's why it's become not just this currency hedge, but also it's needed in industry. So it's sort of the perfect metal that way, that it's rare, it's needed, it's expensive, and the best part is a lot of the holders of gold are not sellers, right? That's always the best investment to have is an investment that people aren't going to sell for forever or for a really long time. And most of the central banks of the world are not going to be selling their gold. They're just going to continue to buy more. So that's a good sign of an investment, a limited supply, and people holding it for an indefinite amount of time.
To your point, also, the same thing could be said for silver. It's being used in so many different applications across the board, and its demand is only going to increase, especially as just global supply challenges continue. And, what you look at everywhere across the board, these precious metals are being, utilized at an increasing rate. So obviously that's going to increase the value as well. So let me ask you this, kind of to transition here into talking about your company and your services and your products and what you offer investors. But I will say, I do appreciate thoroughly your time, sir. And I know you're a busy man, so we're going to go ahead and let you go. But thank you for joining us. And hopefully we'll get you on the show again soon, and we can have another conversation about just current events, whatever's going on in the news. Maybe I'll reach out to you if we have another major news story about anything going on in the world. Thank you, Colin.
Thanks, Greg. Appreciate it.
God bless. All right, so I hope you guys enjoyed that interview with me and Colin Plume of Noble Gold Investments. Very, very good conversation. We're hoping to have him on the show again in the future. We can talk in more detail about other things happening in the world. But with that being said, we're going to go ahead and wrap it up and go right into our God's Grace is Greater segment. And we'll pick up on Monday with more interesting news stories that you're going to want to hear about. Before we do, let's just end it here. We're reading in the in Book of Mark, chapter 10. We're in verse 13, and we're going to be reading 13 through all the way up till verse 22 with a couple of interesting stories here of Jesus' interaction with his disciples and a rich young ruler. So let's go ahead and read right here. It says, "Some people were bringing little children to him so he might touch them, but the disciples rebuked them. When Jesus saw it, he was indignant and said to them, 'Let the little children come to me. Don't stop them, for the kingdom of God belongs to such as these. I assure you, whoever does not welcome the kingdom of God like a little child will never enter it.' After taking them in his arms, he laid his hands on them and blessed them. As he was setting out on a journey, a man ran up, knelt down before him, and asked him, 'Good teacher, what must I do to inherit eternal life?' 'Why do you call me good?' Jesus asked him. 'No one is good but one, God. You know the commandments. Do not murder, do not commit adultery, do not steal, do not bear false witness, do not defraud, honor your mother and father.' He said to him, 'Teacher, I've kept all these from my youth.' Then looking at him, Jesus loved him and said to him, 'You lack one thing. Go, sell all you have and give to the poor, and you will have treasure in heaven. Then come follow me.' But he was stunned at this demand, and he went away grieving because he had many possessions." So, imagine. Let's break this down into two parts. First part, Jesus here having this incredible discussion with his disciples and rebuking them for what they did. What did they do? Well, it seems as though children were trying to be brought to Jesus, right? The parents were bringing their kids to Jesus to have him bless them. And the disciples were telling the children, "No, you can't come. Parents, get your kids out of here. What are you doing?" And Jesus rebukes his disciples and first demands that they let the children through and come to him. But then it says he blesses them. And if you read the real literal translation, it talks about how he fervently blessed the children. And it was a rebuke of the disciples. And he was saying that if you do not welcome the kingdom of God like a little child, you'll never enter it. Well, what's that telling us? It's telling us to have the ability to look at God as a child looks at the world, to understand God as a child would understand God, with an open mind and an open heart that's not been defiled by this world that we live in, this fallen world, to have that humility and that openness to see God in his greatness that goes beyond what we can imagine. You know, when you're a little kid, you have this great imagination. You can, pick up a stick and it's a sword, and you're on a pirate ship fighting pirates and doing these things, or you're in the woods and you can have this whole imagination about what you're doing and where you are. Well, Jesus is telling us to have that same ability to imagine things that are unimaginable when we think of God, right? Because God is beyond our capability to understand. God is something that we couldn't even imagine if we tried. It even says in the Bible and other places, what no man has seen and what's never been in our hearts is what God has in store in the kingdom of heaven for us. So it's things that we can't even imagine. So Jesus is telling his disciples that you have to be more like children, because God is the Father, and he's essentially telling them, he is going to be there as a father would be for his children, but we have to look at God to be our Father in heaven, and through Jesus, his Son, is how we connect to God the Father in heaven. And he takes them in his arms and he blesses them, and then a rich young ruler comes running up to Jesus as he starts setting off on his journey. Now, first of all, back in those days, running for a rich man would be kind of a disgraceful thing. They wouldn't go run after somebody if they're rich and powerful. That they would expect somebody to come to them, right? And if you would go running after someone, then it would be a sign of you being lesser than. It would be kind of a sign of disgrace. But he recognizes the power of Jesus. He recognizes that Jesus is King, is Lord of Lords, and is the Messiah, and he runs after him. And he kneels before him and he says, "Good teacher, what must I do to inherit eternal life?" And Jesus first asks, "Why do you call me good?" Because no one's good but God. Basically, acknowledging to him that he knows that if he's saying he's good, it's because he is God through God the Father imbuing that power into him as his son, right? So he's basically confirming that he is God, right? Because he's saying no one is good but God. And then he gives them the rundown of all these commandments, right? Kind of reaffirming, hey, these are the things that we know we must do. We must follow God's commandments. And what did he do? Jesus came to break all the other traditions of man that had been put down by the Pharisees and the scribes, and the traditions of the Israel, or the tribe of Israel up to that point, and the Jews up to that point. And he broke through all of that. He came to break through man's tradition to say God's commandments are what we need to focus back on, and Jesus taught us how to do that. So he gives them basically a rundown of several main commandments of the 10. And this rich man, kind of missing the point, says, "Teacher, I've kept all these." And Jesus, looks at him and he loves him, but he says to him, "You lack one thing." So maybe he did recognize that he kept all the commands. But he says, "Go sell all you have and give to the poor, and you will have treasure in heaven. Then come and follow me." But instead of doing that, being given this amazing opportunity to follow Jesus and do great things with the Messiah as he's here in flesh on earth, what does he do? He begins to weep and grieve, and he runs away and he leaves because he had many possessions. He was very rich and he didn't want to give them up. So what was he doing? He was putting the things of this world above God. And I think sometimes we can fall into the same trap as the rich ruler here. We may not be rich and we may not be rulers, but we do get connected to the things of this earth more than Jesus. Sometimes maybe instead of sharing a Bible verse with our friends and family, we may decide to share a TV show. And I'm not saying that this is directly leading us on a path toward destruction, but the point I believe Jesus is telling us is that we have to, in our lives, come to a point where we just drop everything and give it to Jesus. Now, I'm not saying that I'm perfect and I'm just, I make all these great decisions and I'm the perfect person and I know how to follow Jesus better than everyone else. I would never, ever say that, but I'll say this, that we have to every day get up and make that cognitive decision, that direct decision that we're going to follow Jesus, that we're not going to be distracted by the possessions that we have in this world, that we're going to give everything that we have to God and let him show us the way. Because he had so many things, he was connected to this world in a way that made him unable to follow God, even though God was standing before him in the flesh. So if it was difficult for him to do that, how much more difficult is it for us now with Jesus being in heaven and looking down upon us, although he is with us in spirit? How much more difficult is it for us to let go of the things that we find all around us in this world? I think that it's not directly talking about giving up everything you have and giving to the poor. It is, in a sense, about giving everything you have to God, and that will lead you to give to others who are in need. That will lead you to build your treasure in heaven, right? It'll lead you to follow Jesus with everything you have. And I'm not saying it's going to come overnight, and I'm not saying I have all the answers. I wish I did. I wish I could tell you exactly what you need to do to honor God in the way that he needs you to right now in order to not fall into this trap. But it's going to come to, I guess, each one of us in different ways. But I will say this. All I can say is that we should never be like this rich young ruler. We should never be shocked and then turn away from God because we're so connected to the things of this world. If you're making a lot of money one day and then you lose your job, don't blame God. Don't say it's God's fault that all of this happened to you. Ask God, what opportunity am I missing in the midst of my trial? Trust that he will provide you with what you need to get by. If it feels like you're not going to make it, if it feels like a relationship that you were depending on falls through or something, don't ever turn to God and blame him. And don't be sad that the things aren't going the way you want them to go in this world. Remember that God's got a plan for you, and it's for your good.